This program recounts a turbulent era in American history. Some of the language used may be objectionable. Viewer discretion is advised.
In the early 1960s, the civil rights movement was gaining ground. The idea of two separate Americas, one black and one white, had become unacceptable to many, and the vision of racial equality emerged.
I have a dream. My four little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
But in the South, Dr. King's dream represented a threat to a racially divided society, and its leaders weren't giving up without a fight.
I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
One of the pillars of the segregated South were its sports, and college football was king. An African American had never played in their legendary stadiums against their beloved teams, until one young man from Washington, D.C. sought to be the first.
Football in the South was a religion. And the football arenas and stadiums were the temples where they practiced this religion and worshiped this God of football. And so they saw me as a Negro, back in those days as they called us, as desecrating their temple.
This is the story of one young man and one university that changed the face of college sports forever.
Black Man, White Field. The story of Maryland's Darrell Hill. Made possible in part by Toyota. That's moving forward.
By the time he was 19 years old, Washington, D.C. native Darrell Hill had gotten used to being a trailblazer. He was the first African-American football player at Gonzaga High School in D.C. and the first at Navy as well, starring alongside Roger Staubach on a nationally ranked freshman team in 1961. But after deciding the regimented academy life wasn't for him, Hill was about to embark on a journey that would make college football history.
I grew up in the 50s, so I grew up in an era, where blacks were somewhat second-class citizens and sort of suppressed, both by the majority community and so in themselves. Blacks had a jaundiced view of their place in the world. So the 60s was a very heady time. It was an emergence.
As Hill began his search for a new place to play, the landscape of college athletics was much different than it is today. Three major conferences, the ACC, the SEC, and the Southwest Conference, had yet to integrate their major sports. But with the blessing of school president Wilson Elkins, Maryland head football coach Tom Nugent decided the time had come to recruit the ACC's first black player.
He said, "I just come back from President Elkins, and we have decided to recruit the first African-American football player ever to play in Atlantic Coast Conference." And I said, "Ooh, that's good." And he said, "And you're the man that's going to find him."
As Maryland assistant Lee Corso began his search, one name immediately jumped to the top of the list.
I don't tell anybody, but my goal was to get Darrell Hill, the kid from the Naval Academy. So I go in and see my boss one day, and he says, "What do you think?" I said, "I think one of the things we got to do is we got to let everybody know we're interested so I can get some candidates." So the next day in the paper it says, "Maryland to break color barrier or whatever to recruit first black athlete." It isn't an hour after the paper went, I get a phone call. It's Mrs. Hill. I said, "Yo, God, thank you."
I was being courted by, the usual suspects in the North, Penn State, Michigan State, Syracuse, and Corso shows up. And he says, "Yeah, well, we want you to consider coming to Maryland." And I said, "Well, you forgot what conference you're in, didn't you?" So, he said, "Well, that's just the point." And I remember saying to him, "Well, that's all good, Lee, but I'm not Jackie Robinson."
But Hill eventually relented, realizing that he was the right person at the right time to integrate the ACC.
It did occur to me, somebody said that you don't have an option here. You're the right guy, and you owe it to your race and your people to do this. It may be another 2 or 3 years before they bring another black forward.
Here's a guy that's smart enough to go to the Naval Academy, right? He's got the leadership college that the Naval Academy wants. He's been through the prep school. He's been through the plebes. Hello, What kind of a study do I have to make? This is a guy that was perfect. He was like God had placed him right there to be the kid to do this position.
Coming up, Darrell Hill fights to gain acceptance from the home fans at Maryland.
And there comes Darrell across the middle, whoosh, catches it, boom, touchdown. We beat the Air Force Academy. The crowd went wild. I think that was the moment that everybody said, whew, this guy's a hell of a football player, and we don't care if he's an African-American, Ethiopian, or what the hell he is. This guy can play.
And on the road, Darrell comes face to face with the realities of segregation when his mother is denied admission to Maryland's game at Clemson.
They wouldn't let her in the stadium. She had a ticket, but they didn't admit blacks. The blacks had to watch the game outside the stadium on a dirt hill called Nigger Hill. I'll never will forget that.
This program recounts a turbulent era in American history. Some of the language used may be objectionable. Viewer discretion is advised.
Coach Tom Nugent's decision to recruit the ACC's first black football player wasn't popular among Maryland alumni, and Darrell Hill's reception in College Park was chilly at first. But in his fifth game with the Terps, he began to win over the home fans.
The Air Force Academy is undefeated, nationally ranked. They just beat Nebraska, and they come into College Park. And we had a 2-minute drill, and I was the offensive coordinator, so I had a special play for Darrell. And there comes Darrell across the middle, whoosh, catches it, boom, touchdown. We beat the Air Force Academy. The crowd went wild. I think that was the moment that everybody said, whew, this guy's a hell of a football player, and we don't care if he's an African-American, Ethiopian, or what the hell he is. This guy can play.
My first couple of games, I wasn't booed at home, but I wasn't cheered with a lot of enthusiasm. That changed the attitude, but it wasn't all hugs and kisses when I got here.
One of the people who befriended Hill from the start was teammate Jerry Fishman, Maryland's only Jewish player. Fishman had dealt with his own share of prejudice and was sensitive to Hill's situation.
When Darrell and I got together, he being the only black in the whole school almost, and me being the only Jewish football player, one of the few to ever play at Maryland, we both had a natural bonding inclination. We both knew what it was like.
He was a middle linebacker, had a mean streak in him. He was big and athletic, and he was quick, to step in the face of racism, whether it be, anti-Semitism or against, African Americans. One day we were down in Durham, 5 and dime.
And they said, we don't serve niggers in here. And I said, well, we don't eat them, so how about just a couple of sodas?
Fishman got the team up, and he was captain, moved everybody out, said, let's go. And then he went down the counter and knocked every dish and saucer and glass into the floor, Of course, there was a big hubbub about that, and the team had to chip in to pay for the dishes, but, it was worth it.
On the road in the ACC, Hill was the subject of constant racial abuse from opposing fans. One incident at Clemson caused Hill to walk off the field before the game even started.
Somewhere along the line, one of the managers comes and gets me, takes me to the side gate. There's my mother standing out there. They wouldn't let her in the stadium. She had a ticket, but they didn't admit blacks. The blacks had to watch the game outside the stadium on a dirt hill called Nigger Hill. I'll never will forget that. And so she couldn't come in, and it was homecoming. There was 50,000 drunk, Southern gentlemen just waiting. and I said, no, this is too volatile a situation. I went back to the locker room, put my uniform, put my clothes back on, and was going to take my mother out. Somehow, the president of Clemson, the chancellor, gets wind of this and comes down, takes my mother to his box. And so I entered the game. When I got dressed again, the game had started. My mother winds up spending the night with the chancellor and his wife at their house, and they stayed friends, until he died, I think.
Up next, Hill suffers more abuse at Wake Forest until Demon Deacon star Brian Piccolo steps in.
Piccolo just comes over and puts his arms around my shoulder and walks me toward the Wake Forest cheering section. Boy, that just cut everything off.
And Darrell Hill's success leads to another first, as Maryland's Billy Jones integrates ACC basketball.
My thought was, why can't I? I never thought about breaking any barriers, but why can't I? I have good grades, why can't I? And that's where I was.
Black Man, White Field. The story of Maryland's Darrell Hill. Made possible in part by Toyota. That's moving forward.
During the 1963 season, Darrell Hill endured countless taunts and indignities while integrating ACC football. But it was the fans, not opposing players, who were the culprits. And one player in particular earned Hill's undying gratitude with an unforgettable gesture of friendship. His name was Brian Piccolo.